When I was a child, I often overheard my grandfather telling stories to the other adults. Stories about ghosts and other strange things that he couldn't explain. It was these stories that sparked my interest in the paranormal. Ever since then, I've read and watched every book and documentary on ghosts and unsolved mysteries that I could get my hands on. I like to think I'm fairly knowledgeable on the topic, but as much as I know, or at least think I know, there's still things that take me by surprise. After all, the world is full of strange stories of anomalies and unsolved paranormal mysteries. Some have logical, scientific explanations, while others just defy logic and all laws of science. So put the kettle on, sit back, and relax as we share and examine some local stories from right here in the Maritimes, as well as stories from around the world. Stories of the paranormal, the unexplained, and the just plain weird. I'm Raven, and welcome to Maritime Paranormal Chat.
Welcome back to another episode of Maritime Paranormal Chat. Good day to you. I'm Raven, and once again, we're creeping it real, podcasting from beautiful Prince Edward Island, Canada. And don't forget, if you have a paranormal, unexplained, creepy, or just plain weird story or experience that you'd like to share in this podcast series, or if there's a story that you'd like to hear covered, then please message me on my Maritime Paranormal Chat PEI Facebook group page. Keep in mind that your real name will not be used unless you specifically say that it's okay to do so. Having said that, we're once again joined by the man, the legend, former Kensington native, now living in Calgary, Damien. I hope the weather up there is a little better than it is down here. Right now we're in the middle of a big rainstorm.
Okay.
And we have 70-kilometer-an-hour winds. I think the temperature is actually maybe +3 or 4.
Gotcha.
Over here, it's pretty dreary and overcast, too. There's not a whole lot of sunshine.
Well, like I always say, regardless of the weather, it's always a good time to light a candle, dim the lights, maybe burn some sage, and listen to some creepy stories. And it wouldn't hurt to have a crucifix close by. You never know what we may conjure up here on Maritime Paranormal Chat.
Right.
We have a lot to cover today, as today is going to be somewhat of a special episode, and I'll tell you why in just a couple of minutes. But first, there's something I have to address.
All right.
Now, Conjuring Kesha. The last time we talked, I mentioned the new show. Have you seen any of those yet?
Conjuring Kesha, no, I haven't seen those yet.
Okay, so I'll give you my critique. I'm not going to tell you anything that happened on the show. I'll save that for a surprise. And I'm not going to tell you how I got to see Conjuring Kesha because I don't have cable. So enough said.
Gotcha.
But anyway, what I thought about Conjuring Kesha, I'll tell you what I didn't like, first of all.
Yeah.
I love the content of the show, but it feels like she's just doing it for the money.
That could very well be the case. It wouldn't surprise me.
And the ratings.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say that is because she has, for guest star, I don't know if you call them guest hosts or not, because they just go in and investigate different paranormal scenarios. But the guests that she has on are, I don't know if it's accurate to call them her famous friends, because I never heard of half of them. And it's like she'd rather have her not so famous friends as guest co-hosts on than people who actually know what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, she's bringing in hacks.
I wouldn't even call them that. I think it's just people that she's bringing in that are celebrities in her eyes to get the ratings up, because she seems to have more famous friends than she does people that know what they're talking about.
Right.
Now, don't get me wrong. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, don't get me wrong. She does have professional paranormal people on there too, but she puts way more hype and emphasis on her friends than she does on the professionals that are on the show. And it makes it very girly. That was my second point.
But it also puts a little bit of the credibility into question, right? So.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I mean, if you're a female, I think you'd probably really like the show more and appreciate it more, because when I say girly, I don't mean like Glee or something like that, but I mean, it just has more of an appeal to, I think, women than it would to men. But I mean, the content is really good. I really like that. And one of the reasons why I don't like it is because, like I've mentioned before several other times, is I don't really care for the typical follow the investigative crew around type show, because they have their own narrative they want to push. And we talked about this last time. They only tell you what they want you to hear.
Right.
You know, like somebody will be in a room and a little ball will roll forward, the light switch will flicker on, or you said they'll feel a draft of air. Things that could be easily faked or misinterpreted as paranormal activity. And if they find out the cause of it, that it wasn't paranormal, they're not going to tell you.
No. It can also be blown out of proportion, just stuff happening on their own.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like, how do we know?
Yeah.
Because we're not there.
Right.
The only ghost hunting shows, and I don't even know if I've ever seen any of these, or if they even exist, because I can't imagine that they would. They wouldn't last very long. But I think the only investigative team that would be any good for hunting the paranormal, for hunting ghosts and whatnot, would be, for me anyway, a ghost hunting team that their main goal is to debunk everything.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like somebody who goes in there and says, okay, this is a haunted house. Okay, you got a broken air duct over here. That's why you're feeling your cool air. You're faking it. Here's proof, and they can prove it. Do you know what I mean? Like just somebody who looks at everything from a scientific point of view, as opposed to putting their own inference in there and hyping everything up that happens to something paranormal. I don't like that.
Mm-hmm. No, because basically all you're doing is faking it. You're bullshitting.
Right. Exactly. And like I mentioned before, I think she really loves the content that she does. I think there's a genuine interest there. And I love the content too in regards to where they go and what they investigate. And I like the idea of a second season because I really think that she would get right in there to all these places that other people don't go.
Right.
Because so far she went to Mount Shasta. Have you ever heard of Mount Shasta?
I have heard of it, yes.
Mount Shasta is for anybody who doesn't know, it's a very, very mysterious place, and it's been known for centuries for strange lights in the sky, strange appearances of interdimensional beings. There's a ton of legends and rumors about Mount Shasta, and they're famous for people getting lost and disappearing without a trace.
Right.
She went to a prison. She went on a Bigfoot hunt. And there's 6 episodes, and overall I'd have to say I really enjoyed them because it was fun to watch.
Right.
More than the other investigative type shows that are out there. And I just watch it again, like I said, on content alone.
Yeah.
Anyway, we have a lot to cover today because today is somewhat of a special episode. And the reason why I say that is because, as you and anybody listening would probably notice, that ever since I started doing this podcast series, I've been running ads for the Missing 411 series of books and video documentaries put out by a guy named David Paulides. And for anybody who doesn't know, these are factual, well-documented cases of people disappearing under very unusual circumstances in our national parks all over the world, but mostly in North America. Now, if you want to watch something that's a real head scratcher that will leave you with more questions than answers, then you really need to see these documentaries or read about them in the Missing 411 series of books and videos. So far, he has 3 Missing 411 documentaries out on video, and I'm not sure how many books, but I think there's about 13 books. And David Paulides has a new video out, new documentary called Missing 411, the 3rd installment of the 411 series called the UFO Connection. This is the latest video. It's only on demand right now, and you can watch it digitally on YouTube or Apple TV, and I'll play the audio trailer for it in just a few minutes. And this new video, when I found out it was called the UFO Connection, it kind of made me think, like, where's this guy going with this? And I almost didn't watch it. Because, I mean, I think there's aliens out there. I think they've visited Earth, but 95% of the sightings that people see or hear of is BS.
Yeah.
Or mistaken identity. So when he came out with this UFO Connection for the latest Missing 411 documentary, needless to say, I kind of took it with a grain of salt, but I watched it. And I would have to say that I've never seen a documentary about UFOs that made more sense than this.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got a lot of good points there. There's a lot of good evidence to indicate that it's very probable that there's a connection between these missing people and extraterrestrials.
Is it possible then that these extraterrestrials kidnap people permanently for scientific research or some other purpose?
See, now that's the thing. If you watch all three of these documentaries, some people are never heard from again or seen. Sometimes, like I said earlier, their corpses are found in places that are miles away or places that are inaccessible where they never would have got to on their own.
Mm-hmm.
Or there's no apparent cause of death. Oh, and they show up in places that have already been searched dozens of times.
Right.
And then on the ones that are found alive are either small children where you really couldn't make out anything coherent of what they're trying to tell you anyway. Like I've heard stories of kids being lost in the woods and they made friends with the bear people and they were kept alive and protected by a bear or a wolf, which is very, very highly unlikely. And other reports, from people, adults that are found, it's very seldom they have a coherent explanation of what happened to them. So the bottom line is, regardless of whatever reason that these people are being abducted for, some are never seen again. And for the ones that actually are seen again, whether alive or dead, it seems like they or their bodies are just being dumped or dropped off from above. And they're being dumped off in the general area from where they disappeared. So that's the million-dollar question. Why?
Right. Well, bears and wolves, they're predators. And what they like to do is that they like to attack the young of the prey because they're an easier target.
Right. But I mean, if they see a small child in the wilderness all by themselves, it doesn't seem very realistic to me that they're going to take this child in as opposed to seeing him as lunch.
Well, no, they have their own pack to worry about and their own cubs.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're called predators for a reason, right?
Yeah.
And just some of the stories that they cover, the missing people that end up, well, basically vanishing without a trace. Mel Nadell, have you ever heard of him?
No, I haven't heard of him.
Well, they cover his story in Missing 411, The Hunted, and he basically went hunting with friends in the forest. They split up. He doesn't return to his friends. Dogs track him to his deer blind in the middle of nowhere, and then they just stop. No scent picked up after that. No trace of Mel was ever found. Absolutely nothing. And Mel Nadell was actually a fitness instructor. He had his own spa. I think it was somewhere in Texas. And he was also a 3rd or 4th degree black belt in Taekwondo.
Gotcha.
And a very skilled outdoorsman.
Mm-hmm.
So how does somebody like this vanish in the wilderness without a trace?
Not through normal conventional means, I would say.
Yeah, and I mean, this is what intrigues me the most about these stories, because people vanish without a trace. Another one they covered was a guy named Thomas Messick. He was an 80-plus-year-old man who went hunting with his friends and family in the forest. They split up. He doesn't return back to his friends a couple of hours later. And here's the interesting part. There was 8 of them, and they were only about 100 feet apart. And no trace of Thomas Messick was ever found. And he disappeared, I think it was 2015 or 2017.
Mm-hmm. I take it there's no indication of an animal struggle.
No, and that's one of the things they talk about on the video, because if an animal got him, then you'd see blood, you'd see ripped clothes. I like to think there'd be some sort of a sign of a struggle.
Absolutely.
Or his gun, his weapon, his walkie-talkie. Nothing was found. Absolutely nothing. Same with Mel Nadell. And this is the crazy part. Like, they don't leave a trace, literally. Thomas Messick even taught wilderness survival training for years. And he was a war vet. Aaron Hedges goes hunting with friends in the middle of winter and goes off on his own into the woods, disappears. All that was found was his winter boots and a couple of his other belongings. Some of his remains are found miles away, and he would have had to have walked several miles through knee to waist high snow with no boots on in sub-zero weather to get to the place where they found his body. What do you think of that?
Well, in that case, it makes even less sense that there wouldn't be any trace.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's when you watch that show, anybody listening, if you want to check that show out, Missing 411 The Hunted, it'll just leave you scratching your head. I guarantee there's just no explanation for any of these. In Missing 411, the first documentary, Dior Kuntz, a 2-year-old boy disappears from a busy campground in the forest without a trace, with his family nearby under very unusual circumstances. I think you'll really enjoy that show, Missing 411. And these are both available on Tubi for free.
Gotcha.
Dennis Martin, 6-year-old boy disappears without a trace from a campground literally only a couple of feet away from his father. There was a bunch of adults and a bunch of kids, and the kids were playing, I don't know what kind of game you'd want to call it, but the kids were hiding, and at a certain point, each kid would jump out of the bushes and scare the adults. They seen him crawl into the bushes, but when it came time for Dennis Martin to jump out, he never came out, and he was never seen again. And that was like 1965 or somewhere around there. It was in the 1960s anyway. And to this day, no trace of Dennis Martin has ever been found.
Is it possible that they may have wandered off into the forest, though?
But again, like every one of these people that went missing, they had hundreds of people searching for 3 to 4 weeks at a time. And they covered a huge amount of area and not a trace. And not so much these people that went missing, that the ones I just mentioned, but a lot of times people will go missing and they'll search an area over and over. And then a couple months later, somebody will find a body in an area that was searched dozens of times.
Mm-hmm.
It's creepy.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. He also has a documentary out for National Geographic that he did called Vanished, and it focuses on a guy named Carl Landers who vanished one day on a busy trail while hiking up Mount Shasta. And Carl Landers, basically, he was there with 2 guys, and it's a walking trail that goes halfway up the mountain. And he was there with 2 guys. It was in the middle of winter. The weather was good. And he got up early one morning because they took a rest at a halfway campsite for people hiking up the mountain. And they stayed the night. The next morning, he got up ahead of the other 2. And he said, I'm going to go get a head start. I'll meet you guys at the next stop. The trail was busy. There were all kinds of other hikers. Nobody seen him at the next stop. And they're only 15 to 20 minutes behind him. Nobody sees him at the next stop. Nobody's seen him on the trail. It's like he stepped out of the tent and disappeared. And again, a large search party was assembled. They looked everywhere. And I mean, it's just like a big open field for miles. There's nowhere that he could have went.
Well, do you remember the Dyatlov Pass massacre?
Yes.
They died under mysterious circumstances, but their remains were found like months after it happened. And it's a very unusual indications, like, somebody cut the tent open, and I think the tongue was torn out of the mouth when it was found in the spring or something like that.
Right.
Nobody was able to explain what happened to these.
There's actually a video out called An Unknown Compelling Force. And again, you can see this for free on Tubi. And it offers probably the best explanation for the Dyatlov Pass. Not saying that I buy it or totally believe it 100%, but this guy actually went to the Dyatlov Pass, and it's kind of hard to explain because he really does get into it, and he gives an in-depth explanation of how the bodies came to be where they were found, if it's true.
All right.
But I'll post that link on PEI Maritime Paranormal Chat Facebook group page. If you don't want to watch that or any of the other ones, you can see tons of these stories on YouTube and different websites dedicated to paranormal, unsolved mysteries, and they're all very well documented cases. They're not made up. These are actual cases of missing people that have no explanation.
Right.
So anyway, so to commemorate this new video release, I thought it'd be interesting to look at some UFO sightings today, and more specifically, some local UFO sightings. And there's more than you think. Now, there's only a few cases that have made it on a national level for recognition. But when you think about it, you got to wonder how many times people see things in the sky that, they're driving along that they don't report or they don't talk about. Do you know what I mean?
That's a very good point, because they're worried about ridicule, or the people think they're nuts.
Yeah, or they don't even believe themselves what they're seeing. Like I remember driving from Charlottetown to Summerside one night at about 3:30 in the morning. And I'm not saying this is a UFO because I really don't know what it was. But I was driving, I got about 3/4 of the way down the Blue Shank Road, and it looked like it came right up from the middle of the road. It shot up in the air, and it wasn't a bottle rocket. It wasn't any kind of a firework that I've ever heard of anyway, because there was no sound. I had my windows down, and it just shot right up probably about, I'd say maybe 100 feet ahead of me. And my headlights were on bright, so I didn't see anybody on the highway or anything, running away from it. But it was like a big blue ball that shot right up into the air, probably I'd say maybe 100 feet. And it didn't explode like a firework. It just kind of went up, got a little brighter, and then just disappeared.
Well, so, a lot of people, they see stuff at night, they probably think, it's probably just an airplane or something,
Well, yeah, and I wasn't going to stop and find out. I know it's Prince Edward Island and not a lot happens here, but it only takes that one instance, right?
Right.
Yeah. But anyway, so having said that, before I forget, I want to give a shout out to our friends at PEI UFO Info and Other Phenomena. This is an awesome local Facebook group page with a ton of updated new information on UFOs, sightings, both locally and internationally, as well as other paranormal phenomena, hence the name. And I know it's added to and updated pretty much on a daily basis. And the members are really cool too, especially the administration. I've been there several times. They're very helpful if you have any questions. If you want to report a sighting, everybody's all there to listen, and nobody's going to ridicule anybody that goes on that site. And if you do go on, if you're not a believer, please keep an open mind and be respectful. So
sounds like a good policy to me.
Are you a member of that site?
No, but I will shortly be.
I really like it because they have a lot of information on there that's up to date, and it's not only local, but like I say, it's international, and yeah, they don't hold back. Like if you want to know what's going on in the paranormal world as far as UFOs or any related phenomena like that goes, then by all means check them out, because that's where you'll find it.
Right.
So anyway, having said all that, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk UFOs. And we'll also have a look at some very well-known UFO sightings that happened right here in PEI when Maritime Paranormal Chat continues.
In the new video, Missing 411, the UFO Connection, David Paulides continues to investigate cases of people who vanish in the wilderness without a trace. In his third documentary, he reveals the first evidence documenting a link between UFOs and missing people. The video will engage the viewer with some difficult questions, such as what are these UFOs and where do they come from? Do they come from outer space, or do they come through a portal from another dimension? And what do they want? Are their resources for survival limited and they're turning to Earth for an alternate food source? The film identifies direct associations between UFOs, abductees, and missing person cases. This 10-year project brings together top officials from the FBI, local law enforcement, search team members, and others that describe a spellbinding fact trail that will leave the viewer asking more questions than officials are willing to answer. Right now, this video is only available online through Apple TV and YouTube Premium. The following is the audio trailer. Don't forget to watch the full trailer with video on YouTube.
This is the location of a missing hunter.
So it looks like people are snatched off the ground, and then some of them are dropped back miles and miles away.
for thousands of years. The human species has looked to the skies in amazement at unidentified objects. We are staring at unconventional possibilities supported by witnesses, video, and most recently, our own government. I have investigated hundreds of cases that push the limits of standard everyday police protocol.
The 3 witnesses saw this object picking up the elk.
There was no cable, nothing discernible holding the elk to the craft.
I know what happened to me. It happened in 1974. Next thing I know, I was in this cubicle.
In many stories, children are right there, and then the next second they're gone. After reading thousands of reports, I started to document what is called profile points. The #1 profile point is lack of scent trail.
It was unusual that they had that many tracking dogs. I never found a track.
The more you hear, the stranger the story gets. Why send a SWAT team on a missing person case?
When I saw that, that's when I, went down on my knees.
They are connected to extra-dimensional beings. Those are real.
How do you explain to a grieving family that something paranormal may be tied to the disappearance?
Wednesday, August 22nd, 1990, started off like any other day for residents of the Maritime provinces, which include Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island, and are located on the east coast of Canada. It was a typical fall day as the weather was clear and cool all across the 3 provinces. But before this day was over, it would prove to be anything but typical, normal, or even believable, as the line between the real and the surreal became a little blurry. The evening was clear and cool when it all started around 7 p.m. as a man from Bellefonte, New Brunswick, reported to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or the RCMP, seeing what he described as a very bright object that he estimated to be approximately 4 to 5 feet long, and it was clear in color. The RCMP then passed on the report to the National Research Council of Canada, or the NRC, which is Canada's official repository for UFOs. Just minutes later, at approximately 7:15 p.m., a woman in Morristown in the neighboring province of Nova Scotia would recall just happening to look up and observed a very bright circular object moving through the early evening sky for what she estimated to be 4 or 5 minutes. Her sighting was reported to CFB Greenwood, where the base commander would file the report with the Canadian Department of National Defence, or DND, who in turn would also report the sightings to the NRC. Not long after this, an anonymous caller from Île-de-la-Madeleine, Quebec, would notify the Department of Transport, or the DOT, probably through an airport, that he or she had seen a bright red ball followed by a tail approximately 15 minutes later at 7:30 p.m. This was seen for only 5 seconds, which prompted the NRC to file the report as a possible meteor. At approximately the same time, a man in Middleton, Nova Scotia reported seeing an orange and yellow circular object for about 3 to 5 seconds. He also reported this to the DND, and again, the report was filed as a possible meteor by the NRC. Also at 7:30 p.m., a Chatham Head, Nova Scotia woman reported seeing a bright lime green oval-shaped object for just a few seconds. She also reported this, which also ultimately ended up being filed as a possible meteor again by the NRC. Meanwhile, something out of the ordinary was happening in Prince Edward Island. According to several reports that came in from 7:50 p.m. to 9:15 p.m., an Ebenezer, Prince Edward Island family were eyewitnesses to a glowing white object that landed in the woods. The whole family watched the strange object, which they described as like an ice cream cone. It was remarkable, one family member recalled, pointing out that the most memorable thing about it was that after it landed, the object was still glowing 2 hours later. One woman who lived with the family said, "I saw it through the trees. It looked just like a big round ball of light." While the glow was still very visible, witnesses reported watching as military helicopters and aircraft soon arrived and began circling the area. Witnesses couldn't understand the need for such a strong sudden military presence, as it seemed so unnecessary if the crashed object was really just a meteor. Meanwhile, Charlottetown RCMP were receiving their share of calls as more than a dozen came in about the crashed object in Ebenezer, and they even sent 2 constables out to investigate, later noting that one officer said he could see it in the distance, but then he just lost sight of it. At approximately the same time, a French Vale, Cape Breton, Nova Scotia man said that he witnessed a red-hot sheet of metal land 300 yards from him in the woods. It was noted that he swears he knows exactly where it can be found. At the time this report was filed with the NRC, the RCMP were planning to question him the next morning. To my knowledge, the results of this questioning were never made public. The NRC would later comment about the large number of reports that night, noting that the phenomena was seen from Anacostia Island to Halifax and from Newfoundland to Maine. Furthermore, all colors of flares were reported in the burning object, as well as fireballs, flaming aircraft, and burning boats. Reports were received over a period of 90 minutes. It was at this point, spurred by the possibility that the object was indeed a meteor, which may have fallen, a group of 30 amateur astronomers from the Charlottetown Astronomy Club searched the area the next morning, but not surprisingly found nothing of interest. Meanwhile, the president of the club was actually doubtful the object had been a meteor at all, stating, "I wouldn't think it would be a meteor when it glowed for so long," he said. "It pretty well had to be space junk or parts of a satellite. That's about the only thing that could have come down unless you want to talk about little green men with buggy eyes." He even spoke with the witnesses and found them to be honest and truthful, noting that they were very credible. It would take a pretty good mind to make up a story like that, he added. Another astronomer of York University in Toronto also offered his opinion to the media that because of the duration of the sighting, the UFO was probably not a meteor. He suspected that the falling object was most likely a satellite. However, despite witness reports and the educated negative findings of the astronomers, NORAD and CFB Halifax still insisted the crashed object was nothing more than just a meteor. To make things even more confusing, a local newspaper reported that the military wouldn't even confirm that anything even touched ground at all. So just like the Shag Harbor case, the reports were filed away without further investigation because it seemed no new information was going to be forthcoming. So for lack of any definitive evidence, the sightings may as well have been due to a meteor. After all, it did have some of those characteristics, and so ultimately, that was the unofficial explanation: a meteorite. That is, at least until 1997, when someone began investigating UFOs. Apparently, an ex-military officer with rescue training came forward, who said that she had been stationed at CFB Summerside on that fateful night in 1990. But had left the Canadian Forces and was then living elsewhere in Canada. The witness told UFO researchers that on the night in question, she and her rescue team had been scrambled to assist following a crash of an object near the base. Knowing of the PEI case, Ufology Research of Manitoba investigator Chris Rutkowski asked her for more details, and it was then that the witness began to describe a very different scenario than what had previously been given to the public. The witness said that she and her medical team had been flown into the Ebenezer area on a Hercules transport after being told to prepare for a rescue mission. She says they were told to bring along their protective yellow-colored outfits for going into contaminated areas, or banana suits. However, once on the ground, she and the team were told by senior officers that they couldn't go near the crash site because of an unspecified security issue. So as they waited, the witness said she watched as a flatbed transport was brought in and then left the site with something covered by a tarpaulin. She says she was sure that whatever had crashed that night had been recovered and taken away on the truck. So it should be no surprise that the witness then said she and the team were given strict orders not to talk to the media about the operation. However, she said she was quite surprised when her own family later asked her what had happened, and that they related the media stories about the meteor. She didn't tell them anything about her own experience that night for fear of reprimand. She also said that one day shortly after the incident, a visiting group of American Air Force officers were sitting beside her in the mess hall, discussing the recovery operation in Ebenezer. She says she asked them what had been recovered, and was told outright that it had been a spaceship. So in the end, what are we supposed to believe? On one hand, the government wants us to believe that what crashed in Ebenezer was just a meteor, while on the other hand, we have several witnesses who are very adamant about what they say they saw that night, totally discarding the whole meteor theory. Could all the witnesses have been mistaken? And do we just ignore the educated, more experienced opinions of the astronomers? Also, if the crashed object was just a meteor or a downed satellite, why was there such a strong military presence needed after the crash? Or are we to believe that the military just happened to be in the neighborhood that night on unrelated business? And let's assume for a moment that the military presence was the result of the observed crashed object, and that the object was in fact just a satellite of some kind, as had been speculated. If they could have just said that that's what it was in the beginning, it would have been the end of it, case closed. And why lie about it? Considering the government's past history in regards to obvious cover-ups regarding UFOs, we as a society have well earned the right to be dubious and question the official explanations given in such instances, especially if the object was indeed a meteor or a downed satellite. Even if this were the truth, which most people doubt it was, it still doesn't make any sense. In conclusion, even without the former military witness coming forward with her version of events from that fateful night in 1990, the government's official explanation is still not sufficient, and the public still doesn't buy it. They say that history always repeats itself, and when you stop to consider the Roswell, Shag Harbor, Falcon Lake, and Ebenezer UFO incidents, so far that old saying holds true. So today, with the popularity and prevalence of cell phones with dependable high-tech cameras, it would seem that maybe ultimately it's just a matter of time before we get undisputable, solid, undeniable photographic or video evidence of a crashed or landed genuine UFO.
We're back with Maritime Paranormal Chat, where we discuss the paranormal, the unexplained, the creepy, and the just plain weird. I'm Raven, and we're here with Damien talking about UFOs today. And there's a couple of actual well-known documented cases of UFO sightings that happened right here in PEI. Probably the most popular and most familiar one that people would know would be the Ebenezer story that we just heard.
Right.
First off, I'd like to know where the hell I was in 1990 when this happened that I don't remember hearing about that.
I was probably living in Calgary at the time, and I don't remember ever hearing about it from anybody.
Well, and I mean, I'm sure I've heard of it. It just probably never really registered because I wasn't into this stuff to the degree that I am now. But when I look back at all these things that happened over the years, and like, it's amazing how much stuff has happened on Prince Edward Island.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Now, just to recap and go over some of the main points of the Ebenezer incident for anyone listening who may not have heard it for whatever reason. Maybe you just didn't want to hear me yapping for the last 10 minutes. We just need to comment on a couple of things.
Right.
So a UFO crashes basically in somebody's backyard. They had tons of witnesses, and what's your view on that? What do you think happened there?
I think maybe some sort of like alien probe. I'm not sure if it was a ship.
The reason why I say that is because astronomy people who investigated this said it's not a meteor. Meteors wouldn't glow for 2 hours after they hit the ground.
Right. Were there any reports of aliens or alien bodies or anything of that nature?
Well, I didn't get a whole lot about that. The only thing that I really got from that was in regards to bodies and whatnot is the witness that came forward a few years later. I think it was 1997, 7 years after it happened. We'll get more into that in a couple of minutes.
Okay. And was there a lot of local chat and rumors for the locals about all this? Did people see all this? And was there any statement about it on Compass or something?
Oh, man, you know what? I would love to find out if there was anything that had to do with that on Compass.
Mm-hmm.
Because you would think that with all that going on, because there was write-ups on it in The Guardian, but anybody who wants to read about this, I'm just basically reading off an article that came out, uforum.blogspot.com. Just do a search on Ebenezer UFO, and you'll find all the information that I have right here. And there's surprisingly really isn't a whole lot.
Yeah.
Just a couple of articles, and they're basically the same thing. Yeah. And they even mention that in here.
Yeah.
And you know what? It really amazes me. I actually called Compass several times on at least 4 different numbers that they had listed online for news. I don't think they have a local number at all for Prince Edward Island, or even the Maritimes for that matter.
Right.
I emailed at least 3 different people who were listed as contacts for Compass, again online, and I never heard anything back from anyone to this day. That's from calls, messages that I left from calls and emails, and that was about a month ago. Anyways, let's just recap, and we'll take it from the top.
Yeah.
It was Wednesday, August 22nd, 1990, and I guess it all started at 7 p.m. when a guy in Bellefonte, New Brunswick, saw what he described as a very bright object that was only 4 to 5 feet long and clear in color.
Yeah.
Now, clear in color, I don't know if that means transparent or just like white. I don't know.
It probably means white. I think that's probably what it's trying to say.
Yeah. And before I continue, I just want to say there are names mentioned in this, but I'm not mentioning any names because I never talked to anybody that was involved. And I'm sure they'd be easy to get a hold of if I wanted to.
Yeah.
But for this particular podcast, I didn't really see the need to do that. At 7:30, an anonymous caller in Quebec notified the Department of Transport, probably through an airport, that he or she had just seen a bright red ball followed by a tail.
Right.
Sometime between 7:50 to 9:15, someone in Ebenezer, Prince Edward Island, was eyewitness to a glowing white object which landed in the woods. Now, she and her whole family watched the strange object, which they described as like an ice cream cone.
Mm-hmm.
And remarkably, once it landed, the object was reported as still glowing 2 hours later. Now, a woman who lived with the family said in an interview with The Guardian, I believe it was, "I saw it through the trees. It looked like a great big round ball of light." While the glow was still visible, witnesses watched as military helicopters and aircraft arrived and began circling the area. What do you think of that?
I think that's a very credible account. You know, and like I said, it's probably some kind of probe that they sent. You know.
See, why that's what I don't understand. Like, I mean, if it was something non-threatening or something that wasn't out of the ordinary, why the military presence?
Because it was unknown. They knew it was unknown, and they wanted to investigate.
Exactly. Now, it says here that witnesses were puzzled by the appearance of this craft or object. Such military activity seemed unnecessary if the UFO was really only a meteor.
Mm.
So by the time the night was over, Charlottetown RCMP confirmed that they had received more than a dozen calls about the Ebenezer object, and they sent 2 constables to investigate, both noting that one officer could see it in the distance, but then he lost sight of it. So I don't know. It doesn't elaborate on that.
Hmm.
Did it go out? Did it distinguish? Did it burn out? Did somebody put the fire out? You know, I wish it was more detailed, but I think that's all we're going to get.
Right.
Meanwhile, someone in Frenchvale, Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, saw a red-hot sheet of metal land approximately 300 yards from him in the woods. And it was noted that he swears he knows exactly where that could be found. And the last anybody heard about that was that when the National Research Council report was filed, the RCMP had stated that they were going to question him the next morning, but nothing ever came out of that publicly.
Yeah.
Surprise, surprise. Now, the phenomena was seen from Anticosti Island to Halifax and from Newfoundland to Maine. So it wasn't like a hallucination, obviously, because...
It was seen by multiple people, right? At the same time.
Yeah, in multiple provinces.
Yeah.
Thinking that the object was in fact a meteor which may have fallen, a group of 30 amateur astronomers with the Charlottetown Astronomy Club searched the area the next morning but found nothing of interest or relevance, which wasn't surprising to the president of the club at the time, as he was doubtful the UFO had been a meteor right from the get-go. Now, he'd later suggest that it was probably not a meteor because it glowed for so long. As we mentioned before, it was most likely space junk or parts of a satellite. He then added that that's about the only thing that it could have come from, unless you want to go with extraterrestrials.
Right.
Which it doesn't say here, but I get the impression that he wasn't a believer. Another astronomer from York University in Toronto also offered his opinion to the media, saying that because of the duration of the sighting and the presence of the military aircraft, the object in question was probably a crashed satellite and not a meteor. However, despite witness reports and the negative findings of the astronomers, as with most credible UFO sightings, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, and CFB Halifax insisted the UFOs were attributed to something else, in this case, meteors. And a local newspaper report noted, the headline read, neither military agency would say, if anything at all, even touched ground.
They're not saying that's pretty noteworthy right there.
Yeah, nobody's saying anything. And I find that very typical. Just like the Shag Harbor case. Reports are filed away without any further investigation because, like I said before, I don't think we're going to get anything else on that, ever, unless it becomes declassified, which, if it was anything of any significance, it probably won't.
Yeah.
So the unofficial explanation at the time, right up till now, present day, for lack of any other known evidence, I guess we could say that it was a meteor. If you believe that. I don't, but...
No.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And I mean, astronomers, I think, would probably know a little more about meteors than the average person would.
Yeah.
And for something to stay glowing white hot for more than 2 hours, no, I don't buy that meteor explanation, but that's just me.
Neither do I. No.
Now, here's where it gets interesting. And I'm just referring to what you mentioned earlier about bodies. In 1997, an anonymous ex-military officer with rescue training who was living in Prince Edward Island but had left the Canadian Forces and was then living elsewhere in Canada told UFO researchers that she had been based at CFB Summerside for several years earlier when she and a rescue team had been scrambled to assist following a crash of some object near someone's farmhouse. Knowing of the PEI case, ufology research of Manitoba investigator Chris Rutkowski, if you're not familiar with that name in the UFO community, you will be very, very soon, because he's basically the lead investigator in charge of all that stuff. So you'll hear his name quite a bit. Yeah. When he asked her for more details, the witness began to describe a very different scenario than had been offered publicly. She said that she and the medical team had been flown into the Ebenezer area on a Hercules transport after being told to prepare for a rescue mission. But they weren't told what they were rescuing. They're told to bring along their banana suits, which is the protective yellow-colored outfits for going into contaminated areas. Once on the ground, she and the team were told by senior officers that they could not go near the crash site because of an unspecified new security issue. So as they waited, the witness said she watched as a flatbed transport was brought in, then it left the site with something covered by a tarpaulin. She says that she was sure whatever had crashed had been recovered and taken away in the back of that truck. She also said that she and the team were given strict orders not to talk to the media about the operation in any way, shape, or form. She also said that one day in the mess hall, a group of American Air Force officers were sitting beside her discussing the recovery operation in Ebenezer. And she asked one of them what had been recovered, and they looked up at her and outright said it was a spaceship.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense, because why else would the military be so tight-lipped about it? But just a meteor, who cares?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you have an official, or I should say an unofficial explanation of it being a meteor, as nobody defined it, from what I gather from this, nobody really defined what it was either way. And then you have somebody that comes forward who was there. Like, what are we supposed to believe?
That was a cover-up. That's what I was thinking.
Plus, you have all the witnesses.
Yep. They can't all be lying. There's no way.
And the military aircraft activity. It's been said that the only way all that military presence would have been there was that if they were there for some sort of unconnected operation that had nothing at all to do with the events that unfolded that night. They just happened to be in the area.
Yeah.
That I don't buy.
No, neither do I. Who could buy it?
That's one of the reasons why nobody believes the government.
Yeah.
You don't know when they're telling the truth and when they're not.
Most of the time, they're lying.
And it really amazes me when you look at the Shag Harbor thing, when that went on. Like, they didn't deny that. I mean, I guess they probably couldn't, because people seen what it was. Like, a UFO literally sat on top of the water before it went under. And everybody's seen this. I think there's like 12 to 13 or 14 witnesses there.
Yep.
So, I don't know. But I think this one just had enough lack of evidence to cast a little bit of doubt on it.
Yep.
So they don't have to admit anything either way. I don't know. But I just wish that something would happen like that today with everybody with their cell phones.
That would be quite the thing. They have a hard time explaining it away if it's got on a bunch of cell phones.
Yeah. So, anyway. And again, I mean, what doesn't sit right with me is all the military being there. Like, that just doesn't fit. And if this woman was telling the truth, that she was shipped in there for a rescue operation, in any event, even without the last witness's statements, the PEI case is not explained to everyone's satisfaction, especially me, and apparently you too. And if the witness's version of events is taken into account, the incident becomes even more puzzling. And that was a pretty good article. I really enjoyed that. And I'll put a link on Maritime Paranormal Chat PEI Facebook group page.
Yeah.
But anyway, what would you do if you ever seen something like that?
I did see something like that in Mexico.
No, I mean something that actually touches down.
I would freak out and get the hell away from it, because you don't know what's coming out of it.
Well, and you got to look at the whole radiation thing too.
Exactly. Well, that's another reason, right? You want to get away from possible radiation exposure. That thing, something like that will have radiation.
Now, I know this doesn't have anything to do with Prince Edward Island UFOs, but speaking of radiation, I think this is worthy of mentioning. Are you familiar with the Falcon Lake UFO encounter in Manitoba back in 60? I think that was 67 or 68 as well.
Yeah, I remember reading a little bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I can't remember how you pronounce his name. Stefan Michalak or Michalak. But anyway, he was prospecting in the mountains or halfway up a mountain or something, and he came across a landed UFO.
Right.
and the door was open. He looked in, and he said it was so bright in there that he had to put the visor down on his prospecting mask, like a welder's mask.
Right.
And he just saw a bunch of lights in there, and the doors closed. And this is after him calling inside to see if anybody was there. Anyway, to make a long story short, nobody answered him. But this craft started lifting up and slowly started rotating. And at one point, he's standing there, and it must have been some sort of vent or something, because it was like a grate with about 16 holes on it, and it blasted him in the stomach.
Right, and I remember seeing the picture of that stomach. You know, it looked like it was a bunch of like a grate burned onto his stomach.
Yeah, and that happened in the late 1960s, and he only died, I think, within the last 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. And to the day he died, he still had that scar tissue. That's how much it burned him.
Was he treated for radiation exposure?
He was. And they said for months that they couldn't go near him because he just stunk of sulfur.
Wow.
It was oozing from the pores of his body.
So he's exposed to something that got into his system.
Yeah, I think so. And those scar tissues were in the exact shape of the grate that he drew on his description of this craft. So, and I guess when it blasted him, it was so hot that it set his shirt on fire.
Yeah.
So
I don't think it was intentional on the part of the aliens. It's probably some automatic ship engine or system that kind of went off, you know, and he happened to be near there when it went off, right? So.
Right.
So it was accidental in nature. I don't think the aliens did this to him on purpose.
No, I don't think they did either, whatever it was. Like, I mean, as far as we know, it could have been an experimental military craft. I don't know.
Right.
I can't see that because he said there were no markings on it, and he said the whole object, once the door closed, it was seamless. He said it was like it was all carved out of one piece of metal.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a standard military stuff, to say the least.
And he had his prospector gloves on, and he touched the craft, and it was metallic. And he said when he touched the craft, his glove actually burned because it was so hot.
Wow.
But I mean, that's probably just from reflecting on the sun. I don't know. Anyways, back to PEI UFOs. Here's one from North Tryon. This was posted by, this was covered by CBC News, December 28th, 2007. This is one of the popular ones that actually made it to the CBC News. Environment Canada and the Transportation Safety Board of Canada can't explain just what it was that a PEI couple filmed in the island skies on Wednesday, December 26th, Boxing Day evening, 2007. And I'm not going to say the names here because I wasn't talking to these people, but if you look up Tryon UFO or do a search on that, then you'll get all the information that you need. But husband and wife of North Tryon, just east of the Confederation Bridge, when they saw a dark spiral in the sky, they went for the video camera. Back before the days of cell phones with the high-tech cameras. Remember those days?
Yep.
I think that's when the actual video camera was just becoming more and more prevalent on cell phones. But anyway. Okay, so the wife said when we first saw it, it was going so slow. We asked each other, was it a meteor or what was it? So when we did start to record it, it was in a cloud, and that's the part that we missed.
Yep.
Now, when it came out of the cloud, we have it from there until it's out of sight. I have no idea. I mean, I didn't think it was a UFO or anything, but to me, I thought something was in trouble. But it was going so slow that it confused me. I mean, it was at least half an hour from the time we first spotted it till it went completely out of sight. The couple say they have no clue what it was, as their first calls were to the Charlottetown airport and the RCMP, but were of no help. So they called Environment Canada, which was also unable to identify the phenomena. The Transportation Safety Board of Canada has reviewed the footage to ensure the sighting was not of an aircraft in distress. A representative from the board confirmed it was not, but had no further details.
And they have a video that they actually posted of this from this article. And I'm sure that I remember seeing that a few years ago on YouTube.
Oh, okay.
But there's links on these articles. There's links to this video, but none of them work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, that was December 28th, 2007. They covered the story again, CBC News, January 3rd, a year later, 2008. And in this article, they said, despite their best efforts, I guess it was just more or less of an update. Despite their best efforts, a PEI couple has still been unable to determine what they saw falling out of the sky on Boxing Day 2007. A woman and her husband watched a dark spiral descend from the clouds for more than half an hour from their home in North Tryon, just east of the Confederation Bridge. They filmed the event, but neither Environment Canada nor the Transportation Safety Board was able to identify what it was. So the wife said the best explanation so far, as somebody suggested, was that it might have been fuel from an aircraft being dumped. She says it was total guesswork on someone's part, but it could be a fighter jet maybe dropping fuel. If they're in trouble, apparently they drop it and they burn it at the same time. Again, this is total speculation. That's probably the best scenario we've heard at this point. She said it'll be hard to confirm the fighter jet theory, but in the meantime, she sent the video the couple shot to Ufology Research of Manitoba, a private, non-profit organization based out of Winnipeg. And again, that video, I have no idea where it is. I can't find it anywhere, not even on YouTube. So that pisses me off.
Yeah, totally.
And the last time they updated it was March 7th, just a couple of months later. And it says a UFO research group in Manitoba has been unable to identify the mysterious sighting in the sky over PEI on Boxing Day. The long smoky spiral was videotaped by a couple from Tryon. Researchers in Manitoba used digital software to enlarge the images and were able to rule out meteor satellites and airplanes, but beyond that, they just don't know. Now, our good friend Chris Rutkowski, head of the Ufology Research Center in Winnipeg, said the couple join a group of hundreds of Canadians who see something unexplainable in the sky every year. He goes on to say they were witness to a very interesting phenomena, and they're one of the hundreds of people in Canada every year who see UFOs. In their case, he says it was something very spectacular in 2007. And apparently, only 1/3 of sightings each year are definitively explained. The incident was included in the group's annual report, and Environment Canada and the Transportation Safety Board also examined the video, but were unable to explain the phenomenon. So,
wow. That's absolutely incredible. It could very well be a genuine UFO.
And like I said before, it's amazing when you think about all the possible sightings that people have that they don't report.
Mm-hmm. Because they're afraid to.
Well, not only that, but I think we mentioned earlier too that sometimes people can't believe what they're seeing.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
Yeah, and I think unless something landed in my backyard, or I had really, really good video footage or some sort of proof of something, I don't think I'd report it either, to be honest.
Yep.
Because, who wants to look like an idiot?
Exactly. Most people wouldn't be bothered doing it.
Yeah. So that's that. And that thing in Ebenezer, it's beyond me why there's not more about that online, on the internet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because maybe it's not considered reliable, maybe, or believable, but...
Well, I don't know. I think that there wasn't enough evidence to keep it going. But I'd like to see something like that happen today, when everybody has a cell phone with a camera.
Yep.
But anyway. So this is actually on the CBC website. Very well documented, and this caused quite a stir in the UFO community when it happened in 2014. And if you want to read this further or look more into it,
do a search on Google search on Kensington UFO. And again, I'll post the link on. There's a video that the guy took too from Twin Shores, and I'll post that link.
Yeah, I saw that video. You know, and it kind of looked actually like what I saw, very distant light.
Okay. Well, I'll post the video, a link to the video on Maritime Paranormal Chat, PEI's Facebook group page. Yeah. And like I said, this is on the CBC website, so you know, I don't think privacy is an issue here. But again, I'm not going to say somebody's name that was in an article unless I talk to them first. But if somebody wants to check this out, by all means, the title of the article is Moncton Man is convinced what he saw off the north shore of PEI was a UFO, and he believes that he has the video to prove it. And the story goes he was camping at Twin Shores near Kensington with his wife in June of 2014, and he was just about to go to bed around 11:30. She was already sleeping. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a light out over the water. Now, he says he watched the diamond-shaped light dancing about 75 meters above the water around a kilometer offshore for several minutes. He grabbed his cell phone and started filming. He described what followed as he watched as a light show. It's flashing bright on and off a little bit, reminding me of a dreidel or spin top. Then about 3 minutes later, a second light appears. He said thinking about the incident after the fact made him realize how unsettled that it left him. He said he had no idea what it was, still has no idea what it was, never seen anything like it before, and he also said that he hopes the video can be enhanced or brightened at some point so people can get a better look at what it was that he was looking at and maybe find out what exactly it was. Because in his words, people are going to think I'm crazy or something. This was more than a year after the incident when he got interviewed by the CBC. He says, I really couldn't put anything to what it would resemble like a helicopter or a plane or anything. But as the light show continued, he says he admitted he started to feel unsettled as his adrenaline kicked in, making him very nervous. Because you don't want to admit that, but yeah. No. And he continued filming but huddled close to a bush, so he was hidden. He says, I didn't want to be seen by it. I didn't want it coming over. Then about 8 minutes after he started filming, the light disappears. So, you seen this video? What do you think?
I have seen this video. I don't think it's an airplane or something. I think it's something unknown, definitely.
Now, that's what I don't like about nighttime sightings, because there's way too much room for interpretation. Not saying that he didn't see what he saw, because I think it's very, very possible that what he saw was a genuine UFO, and so does MUFON, which I'll get to in just a second here. But I think that a lot of times people do film videos of lights in the sky at night, and it's so easy, not saying that they're all fake or misinterpreted, but I do think it's a lot easier at night to misinterpret something as a UFO if it's not, if it's something else.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
He sent his video to MUFON, or the Mutual UFO Network of Canada, which is a nonprofit volunteer organization dedicated to the study of UFOs, for those of you who don't know what MUFON is. And Assistant Director Stu Bundy said an investigator was assigned and every effort was made to explain what was captured on tape, as confirmed UFO sightings in Canada are extremely rare. Now, this investigator estimated that there's about 1,000 reports of possible UFO sightings in Canada every year, but many, like I said, are actually different things. Some of the more common ones are the star Sirius or the International Space Station flying over. Did you ever see that? Like, I've never heard of the International Space Station.
I've heard of it, but I don't think I've ever seen it.
Like, I'd be curious to see that sometime, like to watch it fly overhead, if it even comes close to here, right. Which I'm assuming it does, because they're saying that could have been what this witness saw, but I don't know. I'd be curious.
Space station has been used to explain away other UFO witnesses, so I'm kind of wondering, like, if it's an all-purpose, write-off.
Right. And Bundy, this UFO investigator, says neither was the case for this person's sighting. Apparently, MUFON uses an open source computer program called Stellarium. So in order to figure out what people are seeing, if it's misinterpreted, MUFON uses an open source computer program called Stellarium to see what could have caused the bright lights in the sky that night, including satellites. But Bundy said the investigators still couldn't find any explanation. And MUFON's drone expert didn't think a drone was a likely explanation either, given that there was 20-kilometer-an-hour winds that night, and a drone's battery wouldn't likely be able to last as long as the lights that the witness saw in the sky. And the fact that there were two objects also convinced MUFON the drones weren't the cause. What do you think?
I think I definitely agree. It's nothing we know. I think it's definitely something of otherworldly origin.
See, it's amazing how deep people can go with this topic, because I mean it's exciting for me anyway. I find it very exciting, but at the same time, it's very disturbing too.
Right.
And the reason why I say that is because, I mean, I take these sightings, and let's assume that they are real, they're genuine sightings. I still take them with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say that is because they're not interacting with us. They're obviously not here to harm us.
No.
Because I'm sure that they could do a lot of damage if they wanted to.
Right, and we couldn't find them. They could strike at us from orbit, and we can do anything about it,
Yeah, exactly. Now, on the other side of the coin, when I say that I also find it disturbing, is because I watch way too many documentaries. Like, I mean, this Missing 411 docu-series that's out there, especially this last installment, the UFO Connection. I mean, there is some very, very serious, convincing, can't deny points that are made in this video.
Right.
And when anybody watches this video, keep an open mind. Like, that's all I can say. But I mean, some things that are said in this video and shown that are very, very hard to dispute.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually a guy, and anybody, if you don't want to watch this video, look up a guy named Carl Higdon. And he was actually interviewed in this movie in 1974, in this documentary, I mean. And in 1974, he was out elk hunting, and to make a long story short, he was abducted and brought back. And he was the first and only person that I've ever heard of, and I believe even David Paulides said the same thing. He was the first person that ever came back that actually could tell what happened to him.
Interesting.
And that sounds very, very far-fetched, I know, but when you hear this guy's story, and you really, and one thing I'll tell you, like they really didn't spend enough time on him, because when you go and do research on him and read more into the story, there's a lot more that happened to him than what they said on the video, which kind of fills in the blanks.
Right.
But it's very creepy to think that if this guy's telling the truth, which I kind of believe him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's had lie detector tests that he passed. He's been to psychotherapists that have said he wholeheartedly believes that what he's saying was the truth. So, I mean, yeah, and there's physical evidence too that they look at that you really, again, like, it's very hard to dispute. Carl Higdon. Check that out. But anyway, getting back to this Kensington case, after an extensive investigation, including a site visit, MUFON concluded that what the witness saw was definitely a UFO, or in the group's terminology, they're calling them UAVs now, unidentified aerial vehicles.
Is that the politically correct term?
Apparently, that's the new politically correct term for UFO. And it makes me laugh because when I was researching stuff for this particular episode. And I mean, there's so many things you could talk about when it comes to UFOs. Like, there's just so many different areas you can go with this. But back in the 50s, when they had the first real serious UFO craze, I hate to refer to it as a craze, but when they started seeing all these flying discs, they called them flying saucers. Remember
right.
that?
Yeah, that's exactly what they did call them.
And it makes me laugh because I never heard that term in years.
Right.
But anyway, we'll get more into that on a later episode. Bundy, the investigator, said it's very rare, extremely rare actually, that this is a really serious sighting, and we still refer to it as one of the best UFO sightings in the Maritimes. Very rare that they find what they consider to be a genuine UFO sighting, I guess. It's probably the best way to put that. And the case was actually listed as one of the top 10 MUFON sightings of 2014. And I don't know how this happened, but CBC News only became aware of this case after a recent reposting by the MUFON group. So, yeah. What do you think?
Well, I think, like I said, I think that it's a genuine case, all right.
Yeah.
And the case went all the way so casually off the time.
Now, the witness says some people are going to scoff, but he's convinced that what he saw was definitely genuine and out of the ordinary. He went on to say that it's definitely unidentified. Was it a spaceship? I can't say for certain, but it was definitely something you don't see every day. MUFON said it will continue to monitor the PEI site. So I guess every province has a section of the MUFON group for study.
Yeah.
And I think Alberta was one of the most frequently reported UFO hotspots in Canada.
That one surprised me, especially out in the mountains. Apparently, you see them around mountain areas for some reason.
Yeah, and they get into that too in the Missing 411 UFO Connection.
Yeah.
Chris Rutkowski of MUFON said there was one case in Prince Edward Island in 2012 that made her list of the most interesting cases that year, and it was in Cornwall, Prince Edward Island. And this came out of the Guardian newspaper. The case he refers to took place in January of 2012, but he wouldn't identify who reported the sighting. He says it was reported to MUFON, the America-based UFO group, and sent to them online. Now, he said a Cornwall couple was out on their deck on January 9th, 2012, between 9:30 and 10 p.m. The sky was cloudless and the moon was bright. He said they noticed a bright light due west. The husband focused on the light with his binoculars and could see a craft that he assumed was a helicopter. He says, and I quote, "I saw a red light on one side and a green light on the other, a bright white light to give the definition of a triangle, and a dimmer white LED-ish strobe-type light from within the center."
Mm-hmm.
This is what he said to MUFON. Other than the strobe light, the others seemed absurdly bright, but not blinding. Now, Rutkowski said that what happened next was odd, as the craft rotated 360 degrees without deviation up and down or side to side, and then headed right into the couple's direction, stopping directly above them.
Mm-hmm.
And he says the craft appeared to be 450 to 500 feet in the air above this couple. And what made it even more odd was that there was no sound coming from the UFO overhead. The witness said, "As it approached, I saw a triangular black craft, kind of like a stealth bomber. Wings from the nose, but straight across the tail from wingtip to wingtip. Its lights were ridiculously bright, but did not seem to emit any light. It's hard to describe as it was directly above us. We could see its underbelly." According to the witnesses, he says the UFO suddenly transformed into a ball of white light and began flying east, quoting the couple as saying, "It seemed to consciously skirt the town and just do the circumference and come back. We watched this cycle 3 times and it went north and we never seen it again. Total time within 1,000 feet of the ground was about 5 minutes, above 1,000 feet about an hour before it took off." Now, Rutkowski said the couple asked around Cornwall, but no one they talked to saw any UFO activity. Now, the ufology researchers said they track UFO sightings because it's fairly common, with roughly 10% of Canadians believing that they've seen them. Rutkowski says he doesn't quite know what to think of this sighting in Cornwall that year. As to his knowledge, it was never fully investigated due to lack of evidence, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
And again, I'll post that link on the website because that's from CBC2, I believe it was.
Wasn't that similar lights seen, I think, in Phoenix, Arizona back in the 90s?
Yep.
By a whole bunch of people?
Yep. And they tried to pass it off as military aircraft, I believe, doing an exercise or some sort of training mission that they were doing, but it doesn't really fit when you start reading into the details, like as far as the witnesses go.
Or even just looking at the videos, it's like there's no way in hell that was military aircraft.
Exactly. But yeah, I totally agree with that because too many people seen the same thing, and aircraft doesn't behave like that.
No, it doesn't.
Again, I haven't talked to this person, so I won't use this guy's name either, but this story's on the internet as well if anybody wants to check it out. It comes from a site called www.saltwire.com, but if you do a search on sturgeon, PEI UFO or sturgeon UFO, you should be able to find the link, but I'll put the link up anyway. And I never talked to this person, so I'm not going to use his name either, but like I said, if you want to read into it, it gives his name in the article, but be respectful and respect people's privacy if you happen to look into that. Prince Edward Island man says his sightings of a UFO hovering above Sturgeon wasn't taken seriously. That's what the heading reads. That, in and of itself, is so typical.
Yeah. That close by people.
Yeah, and I mean, what we were talking about earlier, like why some people don't report these things, is probably for that reason alone, I'd say would probably be the biggest reason why I wouldn't say anything unless I absolutely had some sort of proof or knew what I was talking about.
Right. Well, that UFO Mexico I told you about, I have pictures of both the UFO and the other people who saw this thing.
Right. Yeah, and yeah, that's right too. We got those pictures. Mm-hmm. And that's a very common thing in that area, right?
Yeah.
So this witness stepped out on his deck around 11 p.m., September 30th, 2018, just to see how cold it was.
Right.
And he says as he looked at the sky, he noted that there was no moon and he could see the stars perfectly. Then he said something came from the west. The witness says that he's seen a lot of satellites in the sky near his home in Sturgeon, but this object was definitely not like anything he'd seen before, so he thought it must be a plane. The object with flashing lights just stopped dead. Then it shot in a 90-degree angle towards his house and stopped once again. Then it continued again toward the east, stopped, dropped, sort of moving towards Nova Scotia. Next, he says, it flew in a circle and hovered, shooting off and disappearing over the horizon faster than any satellite that he'd ever seen in his life.
Yeah, there's no way in hell something like that would be man-made.
He says it flew in a circle and hovered, shooting off and disappearing over the horizon faster than any satellite he'd ever seen. And the next day, he was getting some paint at a local store in Montague when he overheard a couple of people talking about what they seen in the sky. And he says it sounded like the exact same thing in the exact same part of the sky a few weeks earlier. So it was two different sightings. And he says he really wanted to know what it was that he saw, so he began making calls. He got some numbers for the Royal Canadian Air Force, hoping they could tell him something, but nobody there took him seriously. He called Air Canada. They actually hung up on him. Then he called NAV Canada, who regulates air safety protocol, I believe. They also hung up on him. And the RCMP finally told him that it wasn't something they dealt with anymore. So who are you supposed to call when you think you have something to report by way of unidentified flying objects? Since 1989, Ufology Research of Manitoba has been taking reported sightings in Canada and compiles them into an annual Canadian UFO survey, managed by none other than our friend Chris Rutkowski again. He says sightings are no longer being managed by any military or police groups. At one point, it was the RCMP who were investigating UFOs on behalf of the National Research Council of Canada. They did it for several decades, but they don't do that anymore. So anyway, he's upset that this witness's claim was not taken seriously, and certainly is not alone if that's any comfort. He says he wants people to understand that UFOs can be studied in a scientific way. We can explain most of these reports. And like I said before, these are just stories that we hear about. Like, I'm sure growing up, or even now, if you talk to people about UFOs, I can almost guarantee you somebody, one of your immediate family or friends, at least one person's going to have a UFO sighting for you that they never paid much attention to. You agree with that?
Right. I absolutely do agree with that.
And you want to hear something interesting? When I was working in Charlottetown, I was working at a fast food place, and a customer, this is years ago, this guy used to come in all the time. He'd always come in at the same time. And one night we got to talking, and I asked him where. He always says he was just getting off work. And I said, well, what do you do? And he said he was an air traffic controller. He worked in the control tower at the airport in Charlottetown. And me being the inquisitive paranormal fanatic that I am, I said to him, I said, well, let me ask you this. Have you ever seen anything in the sky that you couldn't explain? Anything weird or anything, out of the ordinary? And he said, well, I'll be perfectly honest with you. He said, I don't believe in UFOs. But he said, you would not believe. He said, I've been an air traffic controller there for about 30 years.
Yeah.
He's probably retired now. But he said, I've been working that job for about 30 years. And he said, you would not believe how many aerial anomalies show up on our radar on a weekly basis. He said, if we go 1 week without one anomaly or a sighting of some kind that shows up on the radar that shouldn't be there, he said, that's bizarre.
Yeah.
And I said, what do you think that is? He said, I honestly don't know. He said, I don't believe in aliens or extraterrestrials or UFOs or anything, but he said, I honestly don't know what it is that we see. That he said, sometimes you'll see one or two aircraft that'll show up as aircraft, what the data interprets as aircraft, and the next second it's gone.
They're probably told not to speak about this publicly because they could end up losing their jobs, right? So,
yeah, exactly. And well, I mean, I don't blame him for not saying anything because, I mean, he's a skeptic, and most skeptics deny what they see. They try to rationalize it away, which is sad. But hearing some of these stories, like especially the guy in Kensington who's seen whatever he saw at the campground, he said how it made him unnerved.
Right.
When he realized, like, there was two lights there or whatever, and he realized how unnerved it made him and made him anxious. Remember when I told you about, I think it was episode 3 or 4. I don't think you were on board then, but I was in Quispamsis, New Brunswick, which is just outside of St. John, probably about 20 minutes. And it's a very rural area. Have you ever been to Quispamsis?
Never been there, no.
Yeah, well, anyway, the place where we were staying, one side, the side of the road had a couple of houses, well-spaced out houses on the other side of the road, all up and down the length of the road. And in the back was a very big backyard. And each house is probably about, I'd say, at least 50 to 100 feet away. But the yard is huge, and it has a tree line, giant pine trees in the backyard. Like, I'm talking 40 or 50 feet high.
Right.
And beyond, it's only one line of trees before you hit the marshland. And it's marshland for, I would say, the better part of a mile before you hit heavy forest. Yeah. And I remember seeing one night before we left, I think it was on a Friday night, I remember looking out the window, and the reason why I looked out the window was about 10 o'clock, looking out the window because I saw a flash of light, and I wanted to get a picture or video footage of lightning because I love watching lightning. I think it's fascinating. But I was looking out the window and the storm was moving away. So anyway, so just before, and the light was out in my room, and just before I leave the window, I see at the top of the tree a little flash of light. Probably about the size of those small mini handheld flashlights. You know, the ones that are just a little bigger than a pen light.
Right.
And it wasn't an overly bright light, but whatever it wasn't something shining on the tree. Whatever it was I was looking at, the light was emanating from this, whatever it was I was seeing. And it was right at the top of the tree. It would flash on and then flash off. And I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. So I just closed the blind and went to bed. But then the next night, and I never gave it a second thought. And the next night, I'm bored. I can't sleep. So I'm looking out the window to see if there's any fallen stars or anything. And it's a very, very clear night. The moon is out. The stars are out. And you could see for miles in the distance because of the brightness of the moon.
Oh.
And I'm just about to go to bed, to leave the window. I'm sitting there on my knees looking out the window with the light out, and I see this light again at the top of the tree, the exact same time, exact same spot.
Right.
And it flashes on. Or maybe I'd say maybe a second. It'd flash on and then it'd turn off for maybe 2 seconds. Then I'd see it again maybe a couple of feet down the tree.
Right.
Then it'd flash off again. Then it flashed on, and it worked its way to the ground, and then by the time it got to the ground, it's flashing along the ground, almost like somebody was doing some sort of a grid search. And I'm trying to figure out what this thing is, because I'd never seen anything like it before. It was a bluish-white light, and it's going all over the grass in the yard, and I didn't see anybody with a flashlight. I never heard any drone sounds. And again, I mean, even if I did, it wouldn't make sense because whatever I was looking at, this is where the light was emanating from. And I watched it go all over the lawn. And then I watched it go beyond the tree line. And I watched it as far as I could see it go into the marshland area. Right. And then it comes back, it goes one side of the house, and then it disappears around the other. And I never seen it again. And I've often wondered what the hell it was I was looking at. Because I pulled the window up. There was no wind that night, or very, very little breeze. I never heard a soul. There's nobody out there walking. There was no, like I said, no drones that could be making it. Fireflies, I know it wasn't a firefly because fireflies have that bouncy bug type movement. You know what I mean?
Right.
Definitely wasn't an insect. And it was a very controlled movement. And to this day, nobody has offered me a logical explanation or even one that makes half sense of what that could have been.
Nope. It was nothing natural. It was nothing man-made.
I'm not saying it was extraterrestrial or anything like that, but I mean, I honestly don't have a clue. Like, I mean, if anybody can give me an explanation of what that could have been, by all means, I'm all ears. Because I've literally laid awake at night not being able to sleep, wondering what it was. Not that it scared me, but just curiosity. Like, I hate when I can't explain something. It drives me nuts.
Yeah, it drives most people nuts. They can't explain it. They're wondering, what the hell was it, you know?
But getting back to the guy who saw this UFO in Kensington, like, I understand what he was saying about, number one, about people thinking that they're crazy. Like, because I had no idea how to tell the people I was staying with the next day what I seen.
Of course not.
Because I didn't know how to put it in a way that it made sense, that I wouldn't sound like I was seeing things. And when I was watching it, I was trying to turn my phone on or catch something on video. And every time I turn my phone on, like I have the white blind behind my head, and I'm looking out this window, and I'm trying not to give my position away because I don't know what's out there.
Of course not. You didn't know how to react.
Yeah, and I wasn't about to go out there to see. Anyway, so I'm trying to turn on my phone, and every time I like touch my phone to turn it on, the display screen would light up and light my face up.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to give my position away. And I mean, I didn't even think, to be honest with you, I didn't even think of turning on my phone until this thing was almost gone, because I was too captivated by it.
Yeah.
Having said all that, we are going to take a quick break, but don't go away. We'll be right back as Maritime Paranormal Chat continues. Don't forget to check out director James Fox's explosive new documentary called The Phenomenon. It's being hailed as the most credible examination of the long-standing cover-up and global mystery involving unidentified aerial phenomena. It includes shocking testimony from high-ranking government and military officials, NASA astronauts, and other credible sources, as well as riveting, never-before-seen footage. This timely film also reveals the monumental events behind the New York Times' recent bombshell disclosure of the Pentagon's top-secret UFO program. It also provides eye-opening evidence that mankind is not alone in the universe. Currently, you can watch this movie for free on Tubi. The following is the audio trailer for The Phenomenon, and don't forget to check out the complete trailer with video on YouTube.
There are cases that are not explainable in conventional terms.
That have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
When we got right up to it, it lit up.
Was this a warning? Was this an attempt to communicate?
Felt scared. I was running and playing, and then I saw this maroon color in the sky.
It was not anything from this earth.
He was looking at all of us. Maybe they're trying to communicate.
They were reaching out to us.
There is an immense array of unanswered questions and an urgent need to get to the bottom of it.
The public has a right to know.
My gosh, look at this thing.
The question is no longer if they are here, but why.
What are they doing? What do they want from us? What are their motivations?
For over 75 years, there have been sightings in the sky.
The UFO shut down several missile silos in Montana.
Thousands of witnesses worldwide.
It had to be a data collection. I'm sure they scanned the warhead.
Just kind of hovering there. It never changed its longitudinal axis. And then it goes poof, and it takes off the side.
And high-level cover-ups.
The government was covering up what happened at Roswell.
Hiding these dark secrets. I was told there wasn't anything there when I knew there was.
People need to know there is something else out there.
Yes, there had been visitation, crashed craft, material recovered.
Shouldn't we be spending some money to study all these phenomena?
I knew this was breaking news for the front page of the New York Times.
They were trying to communicate, trying to tell us something.
Now it's time to tell people about it. These things are real. They're here. This is happening now.
Have you ever seen the documentary from the 1960s called Chariots of the Gods?
Yes, I have.
Now, I don't know how much of that I actually believe, but a lot of things he says makes a lot of sense.
Well, there are paintings made in the Renaissance or the Middle Ages. It shows little scenes of what looks like people looking up at UFOs.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I read the book and I saw the documentary, and I mean, this is years ago, but researching for this episode, I picked up the book again because I remember something stood out for me way back when I first read the book. It was right at the beginning, and I think, if I remember right, after looking at it earlier today or yesterday, on page 1 of chapter 1, he makes an excellent point. And anybody who's a skeptic, you really got to think about this. Because he quotes a guy named Harlow Shapley, who was an astronomer from the 1960s. And Harlow Shapley estimates that there are some, and keep in mind this is back in the 1960s. Harlow Shapley at the time estimated that there are some, and I can't even put a name on this number. It's a 1 with 20 zeros after it. But that's the amount of stars were within the range of telescopes back then on a professional level.
Right.
So when he associates a planetary system with only 1 in 1,000 stars, that seems like a very, he says, a cautious estimate. But if we continue to speculate on the basis of this estimate and suspect the necessary conditions for life on only 1 star in 1,000, this calculation still gives a figure of, it's a 1 with 14 zeros after it. I think it's 100 trillion.
Yeah.
Shapley then asks how many stars in this truly astronomical figure have a potential atmosphere that's suitable for life as we know it. At 1 in 1,000, it still leaves the incredible figure of a 1 with 11 zeros after it. I think that's like 100 billion stars with the prerequisite for life. And even if we assume that only every 1,000th planet out there, out of this figure, has produced life, there's still 100 million planets on which we can speculate that life may possibly exist.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, again, this calculation is based on telescopes using the technology available in the 1960s that have constantly improved since then. And another guy, Stanley Miller, who was a biochemist, Eric von Daniken, author of Chariots of the Gods, quotes him as saying, life and conditions essential for life could very well have developed more quickly on some of these planets than on Earth. And if we accept this daring assumption, civilizations could be far more advanced than our own and could have developed on as many as 100,000 planets.
In this galaxy?
No, and like when you think of, like basically what he's saying, from what I gather from this, is you've got this, and I mean, he put a number on it, but I mean, that's just the amount of stars that represent galaxies that he could see through the telescope back in the 1960s.
Right.
Trillions and trillions, hundreds of trillions of stars with potential galaxies. So if you take 1 in every 1,000 galaxies that has a potential planet for life, anyway, he just keeps breaking it down, and it ends up to be approximately 100,000 planets are very, very possible to have life that's more advanced than ours.
Right.
That's a hell of a lot of planets. That's just what we can see through the telescope.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an incredible observation. Like, I mean, it just blows my mind to think when you go beyond what we can see through our telescopes and technology, what's out there beyond there. It's just endless. And it just blows my mind. I can't comprehend that.
Yeah, I know.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And for people to sit there and think and say like that there's no possibility that life exists out there, intelligent life, more intelligent than our own.
Well, you know, in ancient times, people used to think that the whole universe revolved around the Earth, right? That the stars, the moon, and the sun, everything revolved around us until it was proven otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think saying that there's life here and intelligent life on here and nowhere else, it basically is saying that Earth is the only planet in this whole cosmos of any significance whatsoever. And I don't believe that. That's going back to the old attitude. We're the center of everything. We're not.
Exactly. Now, before I forget, Chariots of the Gods has been remastered and re-edited, I believe, and you can actually watch the original remastered version on Tubi for free. And there's actually a Chariots of the Gods Part 2 called The Mystery Continues. That was put out in, I think it was the 1990s by Eric von Daniken. And that's on YouTube, and it was Eric von Daniken and Richard Karn from Home Improvement. Remember, he also used to be the host of Family Feud?
Yeah.
And I'll put the links on Maritime Paranormal Chat, PEI's Facebook group page as well. Anyway, and it's interesting that you mentioned that about from the beginning of time or all through history, we've seen UFOs and people have been captivated by what they've seen in the skies and whatnot. And I mean, I think it even predates modern man.
Well, in Australia, they made the Aborigines made paintings that look like UFO aliens.
Yes, and I think they even get into that in Chariots of the Gods, because there's cave paintings that they've seen in different corners of the world. We're talking thousands of years ago, when people lived in caves, and the same type of drawings are found in different corners of the world on these cave paintings. Yeah,
and not only that, but the Nazca lines in Peru. I saw it when I was a kid, and the first thought I thought was, this. It looks like the runway system of an airport. That's exactly
that just totally fascinates me. The Nazca strips,
unless they were built as an airstrip in World War II or something like that.
I'm pretty sure they would have known that though.
Yeah, they would have.
And something else I was looking at. Oh, I just love the Nazca lines. Like I love reading about that and wondering, and oh man, that was one of the things I really loved researching back in the day, like when I was in high school and fresh out of high school before the internet. If I ever found any books on paranormal stuff and UFOs and all that sort of thing, I think that was one of the reason why was because that was one of the main things that people wondered about and documented and researched.
Yeah.
And something else that I found, interestingly enough, throughout history, and like I said, I mean, I really believe that these things predate even the cavemen. Like I think they've been coming here for centuries, long before, and I mean, they may even be the reason why we're here.
We're a product of alien genetic engineering.
We could be an ant farm to them, an experimental ant farm. Who knows?
Yeah.
But anyway, looking through, like researching history and UFOs and whatnot, these are some of the more well-known instances of possible UFOs over the years. In World War II, the term Foo Fighter was used by Allied aircraft pilots to describe what they described as various UFOs or mysterious aerial phenomena that was seen in the sky over both the European and Pacific theaters of operations. Have you heard about those?
Definitely, I've heard those.
And it's in January 1945, the January 15th edition, Time magazine actually did a story called Foo Fighter, in which it reported that the balls of fire had been following U.S. AAF night fighters for over a month, and that the pilots had named it the Foo Fighter. According to Time, descriptions of the phenomena varied, but all the pilots agreed that the mysterious lights followed their aircraft very closely at high speeds. And in 2004, U.S. Navy pilots encountered multiple fast-moving UFOs off the coast of San Diego, California. Eyewitnesses also spotted UFOs under the surface of the ocean, and those are called USOs, or unidentified submerged objects. And from a sighting recorded by Christopher Columbus in 1492, which he saw lights traveling under the water before they discovered America. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, I heard about that Christopher Columbus story, yeah.
Yeah. And apparently if you go, I don't know what city it is, I think it's like Paris or London somewhere, but one of these cities actually has a museum where they have his actual logbook where that entry was recorded in. The sighting of a UFO that was under the water and kept coming out of the water, following them for several miles. And of course, we have Shag Harbor. And that goes without saying anything. That pretty much explains itself. And something I'll mention really, really quick here, and I know you'll have an opinion on this, because I know I do. Hopkinsville, do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
What's your view on that? Because I want to do that sometime in the near future with I want to do a story on that because I think that's very interesting, but at the same time, there's things about that really bother me in the sense that they don't add up.
I think that was a genuine extraterrestrial visitation. I think it was grace. I think it was something else entirely. Why they were there, I couldn't say.
Well, that was where the term little green men came from when they started running the stories in the local newspapers, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
They glue in the dark, and they had red eyes, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure they had red eyes. I'll have to read it up again. But it was where they were all in the little cabin in the middle of nowhere in the woods. And these things that resembled monkeys wearing tinfoil suits, what looked like tinfoil suits, were hovering above the ground trying to get into their cabin. And they shot one a couple of times, and he just kind of blew him back a few feet and rolled him over, and he'd just get up and start floating towards the house again. So the cops were called a couple of times, and every time the cops would come out, of course, nothing would be there. And when they'd leave, these things would come back again. But we'll save that for another day because that's a big story when it happened.
Yep.
It was international.
Unless there's a farmer, bunch of yokels making stuff up, it's a possibility too. That just made it up.
The problem I have with that story, I'll tell you right now, but we're running out of time, but I'll say this really quick. The problem I have with that story is you've got a bunch of, I don't like to use the term rednecks because I think that's really degrading. But people that lived, I think this is what, 1950s this happened?
Yep.
Yeah, 1950 something. But you have this family that are basically, I think they were, I don't like to use the term mountain men either, but they lived out in the woods, the family, and I think it was like a Friday or Saturday night, if I'm not mistaken, and they were sitting around drinking, playing games.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the kids, teenagers, went out to feed the dogs or the pigs or something, and that's when they started seeing, I don't know if it was a UFO or they started seeing these beings. And to make a long story short, before too long, they started seeing these glowing chimpanzee-sized beings floating through the air, hovering, gravitating towards the house. And they were trying to get in, but they weren't violent. They weren't trying to hurt them, but it terrified these people.
Why were these creatures even there? Like, what were they doing? That's what I'd like to know.
Let's assume that the story's true.
Yeah.
And this is what I have a real problem with. Okay? So you've got, I think, 4 or 5 adults in this building, this house, in the middle of nowhere. You're in the woods. You've got a couple of teenagers or kids. You've got shotguns. You've got ammunition.
Yep.
I'm assuming that since they lived there, they probably hunted off the land.
Yep.
So I'm sure they would have all kinds of traps and rope and whatnot. So you have these things trying to break into your house, but they're not overly aggressive. They're very slow and almost in a playful sense. Like I think one guy closed the door and one of these things stuck their hand in through the open window and started playing with this guy's hair.
Yeah.
And they, at one point, like I said, they took a shotgun. They shot one of them. It just bounced him back a few feet, rolled him over. He gets up and starts floating towards the house again.
Yeah.
So my problem is that they're drinking.
Yeah.
So you're going to have that liquid courage. You've got several adults there. You've got weapons. You've got trapping gear. These things were very slow moving. They weren't threatening in any way. Yep. Why in the hell wouldn't you throw a noose around one of them?
Yeah,
or try to get them to into a bear trap or something?
Unless they're just too scared to do something like that. They're probably terrified out of their minds.
But why? I could understand that if these things were like banging on the walls and they had guns or weapons with them and they're trying to aggressively get into the house, but they were just basically floating there, gravitating towards the house, just very gently tapping on the windows and on the doors.
Mm-hmm.
And, you've got 4 adults and there's alcohol involved, there's ammunition, there's trapping gear. Why the hell not try to trap one of them? Tie one of them up.
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
You'd have the find of the millennium.
Yeah, it made news stories all over the world.
Yeah. And that's the biggest problem that I have with that. That and the fact that every time the police went there, they all took off.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. But anyway, we'll cover that on another time. But anyway, we're out of time for today. Any last thoughts or anything else you want to add before we sign off this week?
Oh, are you familiar with the Travis Walton case?
I'm sorry, what was that?
The Travis Walton case?
What about the Travis Walton case? Do you believe that?
I think he believes. I've seen him interviewed, and he seemed very sincere. Like, I really don't believe he's lying. I think him and the other guy saw something weird that night, you know?
Now, did he not take a lie detector test and pass?
They all did.
They all did.
They all did.
See, when you start doing stuff like that, it lends a lot of credibility to what they're saying. Mm-hmm. And I'm not overly familiar with that case. I remember I saw the movie, and I only seen it when I came out. I was only a teenager back then. But I just remember I was indifferent at the time. I didn't know what to think. I think now I would probably appreciate the story more to the point where I would look into it more.
Yeah.
Because I think that's one of the biggest UFO abduction cases in existence.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. But yeah, we'll have to cover that again sometime. What I want to do is I want to cover the Hopkinsville story. I want to do the Falcon Lake. A couple of incidents happened in Newfoundland. And that was big in the 70s. We'll have to get more information on that sometime. And there's a lot of UFO stories, encounters that are out there. And I mean, it's so hard to narrow them down to just a couple for an hour and a half podcast.
Yeah.
Anyway, we are out of time for today, but we will be back next time with more thrills, more chills, more creepy stories of the paranormal, the unexplained, and the just plain weird. Having said all that, this is Raven and Damien signing off. Thank you once again for listening. Until next time, don't forget to creep it real, and we'll scare you later. Take care.
Have a good one.
Don't forget that if you have a paranormal, unexplained, or just plain weird story or experience that you'd like to share, or if there's a famous story or event that you want to hear covered on this podcast series, you can direct message me on Maritime Paranormal Chat, PEI's Facebook group page. I'd love to hear your story and possibly use it on a future episode. Keep in mind that your real name won't be used unless you say that it's okay to do so.